Zoo on February 19, 1945. The Pacific shook with fire. From the decks of hundreds of American warships, thunder rolled across the sea, a barrage so immense that the very volcanic rock of Iwo Jima seemed to boil beneath the rain of steel. Grey columns of smoke rose like twisted cathedrals. The air was sulphur, the ground an open wound. For the men of the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions waiting in Higgins boats, every heartbeat pounded against the drone of engines and the steady crackle of radio static. They were young, burdened with packs and rifles, staring into a horizon of black sand and fire. Few realized they were about to step into one of the deadliest landscapes in human history. U.S. Navy log, Feb 19, 1945. The island before them was no ordinary fortress. Barely 8 square miles shaped like a ragged triangle, Iwo Jima was a volcanic wasteland bristling with hidden death. The Japanese had transformed it into a labyrinth, concrete bunkers, minefields, and a web of tunnels stretching miles underground. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commanded the garrison of roughly 21,000 men, many of them engineers who had worked tirelessly with picks, explosives, and sweat to carve out a subterranean city. He knew he could not win, but he believed he could bleed America so deeply that future invasions would seem unbearable. Imperial Army orders, Deck 1944. As the Marines surged toward the beaches, the illusion of success filled the air. The bombardment had been biblical. Over 7,000 tons of shells and bombs poured into the island. Commanders believed little could remain alive on Iwo Jima. Officers spoke in clipped tones of a quick operation. 1 week, maybe less. Yet as the first waves of Marines clambered out of their landing craft and sank knee-deep into the volcanic ash, silence greeted them. No machine gun fire, no mortars, only the crunch of boots in sand and the clatter of equipment. For a moment it seemed as if the island had died. After Action Report 5th Marine Division 1945, but Kuribayashi had crafted a masterpiece of defense. He had forbidden the suicidal banzai charges that had doomed earlier garrisons. Instead he waited. Hidden gunners, artillery pieces embedded in rock, and sniper nests with fields of fire mapped down to the yard. At 10 a.m., the volcano roared back to life. From the cliffs of Mount Suribachi to the northern ridges, Japanese guns erupted in synchronized fury. Whole companies of Marines were cut down in seconds. German tanks bogged in the ash became blazing coffins. Medics struggled through hell, dragging men whose uniforms smoldered from white-hot shrapnel. Radios filled with overlapping screams and coordinates. Pinned down. We need smoke. For God's sake, bring up the flamethrowers. Signal Corps transmission, Feb 19, 1945. The black sand itself became a weapon. Every step drained strength. Every attempt to dig cover collapsed inward. Mortar shells plunged into the crowded beaches, tearing men apart as bulldozers tried to carve exits through the dunes. Navy beachmasters fought to control the chaos, waving flags amidst carnage, as more waves of landing craft grounded ashore, pushing thousands more Marines into the kill zone. By nightfall of the first day, 30,000 Marines were ashore, but the cost was staggering. Nearly 2,400 casualties in a matter of hours, with Mount Suribachi looming above them like a grim sentinel. U.S. Marine Corps Casualty Report, Feb 1945. The Japanese could not believe what they saw. Marines, shot to pieces, still clawed forward. Platoons reduced to handfuls of men pressed into the volcanic gullies, refusing to retreat. Japanese observers noted with disbelief that the Americans kept advancing into certain death. They fight like men possessed. Even under impossible fire, they crawl forward, dragging their dead with them. One diary recorded, Bundesarchiv, captured Japanese diary, 1945. Still, Kuribayashi's plan was working. Every hour bled the Americans deeper, every yard of ash bought with oceans of blood. As night fell, the island burned with a terrible glow. Warships continued to hammer the ridges, their shells screaming into the volcanic slopes. But each morning revealed the same nightmare, bunkers untouched, guns firing again as if the earth itself were spitting fire. Marines began to whisper that Iwo Jima was alive, that the island itself hated them. Exhaustion spread. Rations ran low and corpsmen worked until their hands trembled uncontrollably. It was like landing on the moon. But the moon was trying to kill us, one survivor later recalled. Oral History, 5th Marines, 1946. By the third day, Suribachi still towered unbroken over the southern beaches. The mountain's honeycombed tunnels spewed death at every attempt to climb its slopes. At night, Japanese infiltrators emerged like phantoms, throwing grenades into foxholes before vanishing underground. Marines huddled with knives gripped tight, knowing the darkness carried death. Flamethrower teams and demolitions men, the pioneers, were tasked with burning out positions one by one, crawling forward under fire, often consumed in the very flames they unleashed. Combat Engineer Memoir, 1947. The Marines' survival astonished even themselves. Units mauled beyond recognition held their ground against all instinct to fall back. Chaplains carried rifles. Cooks became riflemen. Corpsmen sprinted through storms of lead with morphine in their teeth. And still, the fleet offshore pumped shells into the rock, as if determined to erase the very island from existence. Yet the island held, and Kuribayashi's garrison, starving, sleepless but fanatical, refused to break. The Americans were trapped in a purgatory between sea and volcano, clawing forward inch by inch. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. It was a nightmare with no end in sight. The first flag on Suribachi would not rise until the 5th day, after entire battalions had been bled nearly dry. Even then the island was far from taken. The heart of Iwo Jima still beat in its northern ridges, a tangled maze of defenses Kuribayashi had built to last weeks. The Marines had survived the opening descent into volcanic hell, but the true crucible, the hidden secret that allowed them to endure what should have been impossible, was still to come. And when it is revealed, it will explain why Japanese soldiers, hardened to die, could not comprehend how the Americans kept living. At dawn on February 23, 1945, the ash-stained sky over Iwo Jima split with the echo of naval guns. But on the ground, amidst the ruins of the beaches, another battle was being waged, not just against Japanese fire, but against the island itself. Marines stumbled forward with torn boots and blackened hands, surviving on courage and a hidden advantage invisible to the enemy. To the Japanese, it seemed impossible. They had calculated, down to the ration, how long the Americans could last under such conditions. Their mathematics predicted annihilation, yet the Marines did not break. The secret lay not in willpower alone, but in a system of innovation and logistics that had quietly transformed the American war machine. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The Japanese expected the volcanic island to swallow the invaders. Its ash-devoured equipment, clogged rifles and choked lungs. Ammunition and supplies had to be dragged inland through knee-deep grit while under machine gun fire. Yet the Marines' hidden lifeline was the relentless coordination of naval gunfire, aerial spotting, and portable communications. Unlike previous island battles, every rifle company now carried the voice of the fleet. Motorola's SCR-300 backpack radios, introduced in 1943, allowed platoon leaders to direct fire missions with terrifying speed. Within minutes, coordinates shouted over a crackling handset became arcs of steel raining down on Japanese bunkers. To defenders who had survived 3 days of bombardment, only to see their positions obliterated in seconds, it seemed like sorcery. Technical Manual TM-11-242, 1944. Kuribayashi's gunners were trained to exploit the silence between American barrages, rushing men and ammunition into new firing points. But with FM radios stitching beach to battleship, that silence never came. Marines pinned beneath fire could summon destroyers to rake a ridgeline with 5-inch shells. Forward air controllers marked targets with smoke, bringing corsairs screaming down at 45 degrees to blast pillboxes open. It was a dance of fire, improvised across black ash and blood, with each step made possible by circuits, batteries, and antennas carried on Marine backs. After-action report, 4th Marine Division, 1945. Enemy diaries reveal disbelief. The Americans summon ships as if they are in the sky themselves. No position is safe. One Japanese officer scrawled before his bunker collapsed under naval fire. Bundesarchive captured diary 1945. This coordination was the hidden blade of Iwo Jima. Kuribayashi's tunnels had been designed to resist bombardment, but not the immediate, responsive destruction brought by men on the ground tied to warships miles offshore. The secret advantage was not just in communications. Engineering, often invisible in the smoke of war, turned the tide. Seabees naval construction battalions landed behind the first waves, bulldozing through shell craters while shells still fell around them. They carved supply routes up the beaches, built makeshift airstrips under fire, and dragged stranded tanks out of volcanic pits. General Holland Howlin' Mad Smith later remarked that without the Seabees, the invasion would have drowned in chaos. Navy Bureau of Yards and Docks Report, 1945. Their bulldozers, scarred by shrapnel, became weapons as much as the rifles of the infantry. The tanks, too, were transformed. M4A3 Shermans with their 75mm guns had proven vulnerable in earlier Pacific battles. At Iwo Jima, many were modified with flamethrowers, the M4A3R3, nicknamed the Zippo. Their nozzles could spew burning fuel up to 150 yards, pouring liquid fire into cave mouths that resisted shells and grenades. In the tunnels, heat climbed until flesh seared and oxygen vanished. For the Japanese, who had prepared to fight underground for weeks, the flamethrower was a weapon of apocalypse. Survivors wrote of entire platoons incinerated in seconds, their screams echoing through the rock. Bureau of Ordnance Report, 1945. One decisive clash came on February 26, as the 21st Marine Regiment attempted to seize Hill 362A, one of the northern strongpoints. The terrain was a nightmare. Jagged ridges, interlocking fields of fire, and hidden guns that could not be silenced by artillery alone. The 2nd Battalion advanced in short bursts, men crawling through gullies, while machine gun fire chewed the ash around them. Radios crackled non-stop. Target at grid 263, fire for effect. Within moments, naval salvos slammed into the ridge, blasting craters into the volcanic rock. But the Japanese reappeared, crawling from unseen tunnels, hurling grenades into the craters. U.S. Army Map Coordinates Log. 45. It was then that the flamethrower Shermans moved forward, escorted by riflemen. Marines shouted directions into their handsets, guiding the tanks as if conducting an orchestra of fire. The first jet of flame erupted into a hillside cave, and a gale of smoke poured out, followed by the muffled detonation of Japanese ammunition cooking off. Entire sections of the ridge fell silent as the fire crawled underground, consuming oxygen. Within hours, Hill 362A was reduced to a smoldering ruin. The Marines counted their losses, 600 casualties, but the position was theirs. Japanese records indicate fewer than a dozen defenders survived out of several hundred. U.S. Marine Corps Operations Report, Feb 1945. The technical edge was not flawless. Radios failed in the ash, batteries died, antennas snapped under fire. But American engineers had anticipated this. Spare parts flowed in on landing craft, repair depots were established on the beach within days, and field technicians worked by lantern light to keep communications alive. It was an industrial muscle that Japan could not match. Where Kuribayashi rationed shells and water, the Americans poured steel and supplies in endless streams from their fleet, anchored offshore. U.S. Naval Supply Bureau, 1945. Still, the cost of this advantage was horrific. Every yard gained with radio and firepower was paid for in blood. Casualties mounted so high that rifle companies shrank from 2 to 40 men to fewer than 50, yet the hidden system of coordination meant that even shattered units could summon destruction far beyond their size. Survivors carried the weight of entire regiments in their hands, their radios multiplying their firepower. In Japanese after-action notes, officers wrote of Marines who should have perished but instead summoned storms upon us, dramatized composite. Imperial Army Notes, 1945. As the Marines pressed northward, the scale of destruction shocked even hardened veterans. The island itself seemed to be dissolving under bombardment, its ridges collapsing into smoking craters. Yet the Japanese did not yield. They fought from beneath the ash, appearing and vanishing like ghosts, immune to the fleets above. Only the combination of relentless communication, flamethrowers, and engineering ingenuity made progress possible. This synergy was not obvious to the Marines bleeding in the gullies. To them, survival was luck, courage, or divine providence. But to Kuribayashi's survivors, it was an incomprehensible miracle. By March 3rd, the Marines had pushed through the northern defensive belts. Though the cost was over 20,000 American casualties, the Japanese still held pockets of resistance, each one a furnace of fire and death. The Marines' hidden advantage, radios whispering to ships, bulldozers carving roads under fire, tanks breathing flame, was the only reason the invasion had not failed outright. Japanese soldiers starving in tunnels recorded their disbelief. "We cannot kill them fast enough. They keep coming like demons from the sea." Dramatized composite, Captured Diary, 1945. The hidden edge had been revealed in fire. Yet the psychological storm it unleashed was only beginning. For both sides, the memory of this volcanic hell would leave scars that reached far beyond the black sand of Iwo Jima. By mid-March 1945, the volcanic island was little more than a charred carcass, a graveyard of steel and bone. Out of 21,000 Japanese defenders, nearly all were dead. Fewer than 300 surrendered, dragged from tunnels, starved, delirious, their uniforms hanging in tatters. U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence Report, March 1945. The Marines, though victorious, were shattered. Nearly 7,000 Americans had been killed and over 19,000 wounded. Yet they had done the impossible. They had endured a fortress engineered to annihilate them. The secret lifelines, the radios, the CBs, the flamethrower Shermans, had not only broken Kuribayashi's defense, but reshaped the very psychology of modern warfare. The strategic consequences emerged almost immediately. Iwo Jima's 3 airfields, once pockmarked and cratered, were repaired within weeks. By April, B-29 superfortresses returning from raids on Tokyo were landing there, hundreds of crippled bombers saved by the tiny volcanic strip. Over the course of the war's final months, more than 2,200 B-29s made emergency landings on Iwo Jima, each one carrying crews of 10 to 12 men. Army Air Force's Statistical Digest, 1946. For those airmen, the black ash became sacred ground. To them, Iwo Jima meant survival. For the Japanese, it was proof that America's logistics had turned a suicide trap into a forward base overnight. The psychological impact rippled through both sides. Allied troops, though devastated by losses, spoke of a grim pride. "If we could take Iwo, we could take anything," one Marine recalled years later. Oral History, 3rd Marine Division, 1949. For the Japanese, the defeat was crushing. Kuribayashi's doctrine of attrition had failed. Instead of bleeding America into hesitation, he had revealed that no fortress was unassailable when faced with American industry and coordination. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers often returned to Iwo Jima as the battle that destroyed their faith in static defense. Even in the strongest stone, they found a way through, one officer admitted under questioning. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The hidden advantages of Iwo Jima were not just material, they were human. The Seabees, the radio operators, the engineers who kept batteries alive in ash storms, the tank crews who risked immolation in their flame-spewing Shermans, all became part of a collective machine that overwhelmed the Japanese strategy. In war, survival depends not only on courage, but on systems of support. Iwo Jima proved that America's ability to adapt under fire was as deadly as its rifles and bombs. Kuribayashi's defense had a lasting effect on American doctrine. Officers studying the battle saw in his tunnels a grim foreshadowing of future wars. His refusal to waste lives on banzai charges, his emphasis on interlocking fire and concealed positions, these would echo later in Korea and Vietnam, where American troops again faced enemies who fought from beneath the earth. Yet unlike his successors, Kuribayashi lacked the ability to counter America's seamless coordination of sea, air, and land. That integration, refined in the volcanic hell of Iwo Jima, would grow into the doctrine of joint operations that defined the Cold War and beyond. Department of Defense Strategic Review, 1953. The Marines carried scars home, visible and invisible. Survivors spoke of nightmares filled with ash and fire, of screams echoing in tunnels that seemed to go on forever. Medals of honor were awarded in unprecedented numbers, 27 in all, more than for any other single battle in American history. Many were posthumous, the citations reading like epitaphs for men who charged bunkers, dragged wounded comrades, or stood against machine guns until their bodies gave out. For the families who received folded flags, Iwo Jima was both a source of pride and a wound that never healed. Congressional Medal of Honor citations, 1945. Yet the legacy of Iwo Jima extended far beyond grief. It shaped the perception of American power. Photographs of the battle, particularly Joe Rosenthal's immortal image of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi, burned into global memory. For the United States, it became a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and unstoppable force. For Japan, it was a grim prophecy of Okinawa, where the same cycle of attrition, fire, and blood would repeat on an even larger scale. And for the world, it was a warning that modern war consumed not just soldiers but nations. The technological threads woven at Iwo Jima stretched forward into history. The SCR-300 radios became the ancestors of the portable communications that later defined the Vietnam War and eventually modern battlefield networks. The CB's ability to turn ash into airstrips foreshadowed the American military's doctrine of rapid expeditionary construction, vital in Korea, Vietnam, and even the Gulf War. The flamethrower tanks, though eventually replaced by more advanced weapons, symbolized the brutal ingenuity of American adaptation. Every lesson of Iwo Jima whispered into the strategies of future conflicts. But perhaps the greatest impact was psychological. To Japanese soldiers, watching Marines endure what should have been unsurvivable shook the core of their warrior ethos. The Bushido ideal, that spirit could overcome steel, died on Iwo Jima. They saw men who, even when torn apart, dragged themselves forward with radios in their hands, summoning destruction greater than any sword or bayonet could resist. In post-war interviews, Japanese veterans often described the Americans not as men, but as an elemental force, tides of fire and iron that could not be stopped. U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Report, 1946. To the Marines themselves, the lesson was harsher. They learned that victory did not come from glory, but from survival. They saw friends burned alive, torn apart, lost in tunnels that collapsed forever. They carried those memories into silence, often unable to speak of them for decades. Yet in that silence lay a truth that shaped generations of veterans. Survival depended not on individual heroism alone, but on the unseen hands of engineers, logisticians, and inventors who gave them the tools to endure volcanic hell. As the Cold War dawned, military theorists studied Iwo Jima not as a battle for an island, but as a glimpse into the future. They saw how coordination of land, sea, and air, tied together by communication, could break even the most hardened defenses. They saw how engineering, not just firepower, could transform battlefields. And they saw how the psychological toll of such combat, on both victor and vanquished, reshaped the will of nations. These lessons flowed into doctrines of nuclear deterrence, rapid deployment, and eventually network-centric warfare. In the end, Iwo Jima was more than a battlefield. It was a crucible where technology, willpower, and blood forged a new vision of modern war. For the Japanese, it was proof that courage could not overcome the relentless machine of American industry. For the Marines, it was the price of survival, paid in ash, fire, and memory. For the world, it was an image, 6 men raising a flag on a mountain of death, a symbol that transcended the island itself. General Kuribayashi's last message to Tokyo, intercepted and translated after the battle, read simply, "The enemy fights with a strength beyond imagination. Our spirits remain, but our bodies are ash." Intercepted Imperial Army Signal, March 1945. And for those who walked off Iwo Jima alive, the memory was eternal. In volcanic hell they had survived not by chance, but by the convergence of courage, ingenuity, and the hidden lifelines of war.